My name is Jennifer Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of NASW New Jersey, and I'm really excited to be here with all of you for this perhaps critical conversation. I know you have lots of burning questions regarding telehealth and the new regulations that have been put out, and also the independent contractor status and what that means for you and your practice. We are so fortunate to be joined by two of our leading experts in this area, David and Laura Berry. David is a social worker and attorney, and both he and Laura are exceptional leaders in these areas. Both have experience with our practice of social work and all of our rules and regulations, and David is a past president of NASW New Jersey. So we're so thankful for both of you to be here and to lead us through some of these challenging questions and let us pick your brains. We do have a number of questions that were submitted before the event. Lots of them had to do with interstate practice of telehealth and regulations and things like that. This is not what today's conversation is about. We will be happy to answer those though. So if those questions don't get answered today, they will likely not. You can shoot us an email after the fact, and our chapter staff will be able to help you and point you in the right direction. But today's conversation, I'm going to hand over to David and Laura. I'm going to let you dive into it and then just interject with a bunch of the questions that we've had come up. We do encourage you all to participate in today's conversation as well. You can do so through a couple of different ways. You can raise your virtual yellow Zoom hand, and I will bring you online to ask your question. You can chat it in the chat box. The staff and I are here and we'll be monitoring that and can answer them for you. Or you can message me privately and I'll be happy to read your questions anonymously as well. So we look for you to participate. We hope this will answer most of your burning questions. And with that, I turn it over to David and Laura. Welcome and thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you. I would be at risk, we would be at risk of getting disbarred if we didn't start with a disclaimer. And the disclaimer is this, and all of you could have predicted this. It's this is intended to be of service to NASW New Jersey and its membership. It is meant to be educational. It is not intended and should not be relied upon as specific legal advice, right? It's really meant to put you on notice that, among other things, the Telehealth Registry law is there, and for you to have enough information to explore it further on your own and or with counsel. Your specific details matter, facts matter, and this audience knows that as well as any I can imagine. So not specific legal advice, proceed accordingly. And that's equally applicable to the Telehealth Registry that I'm going to speak about, and to the employee versus independent contractor law that Laura is going to speak about. So shall I go first with the?
Doesn't matter. Mine will be quick, but maybe.
Jen, any preferences?
Let's dive into the Telehealth Registry, and then we'll do the independent contractor.
Okay. All right, let me start by giving you a little bit of background, why we're talking about this. How did we get here? And the short explanation is this. In approximately April of 2020, telehealth regulations, and I'm using telehealth and telemedicine interchangeably, but a legislation in New Jersey was proposed back in April of 2020 to adopt regulations implementing the legislation. Actually, New Jersey started trying to regulate telehealth and telemedicine since 2017. In 2020, initial regulations were proposed. They were finalized, quote unquote, very recently in August of 2021. Late August. And that's what brings us here. So these August 2021 regulations are finally beginning to implement the broad outlines of the telehealth law passed in 2017. It's been a long time coming. Bureaucracy have taken to get us here, enormous questions exist, enormous questions that impact you. And that's what I want to focus on a little bit. And I want to delineate between what we're pretty certain about, what we're not certain about, and what's in between. And our intention is to give you practical advice and maybe practical next steps if they're warranted. All right. Give me a moment, please. So basically, we have the regulations that say very shortly, by mid-October, if you are covered by this regulation, you've got to register with the state. And the cost of registration is $1,500. Okay, and that's an annual registration that takes place. So the immediate question is, do I have to register? On the face of it, the regulations tell us that if you are an organization, facility, or healthcare provider licensed by the state of New Jersey, you're not required to register. So it would stand to reason that if you're a licensed social worker, licensed clinical social worker, indeed any number of other New Jersey licensed mental health professions, you would be outside the scope of this. And I'm not making that up. That's from the very website on the registry. Those are the very instructions on the registry.
If only it were so easy.
Yeah. To our credit or our detriment, Laura and I have a deeply dark, suspicious nature with respect to such seemingly pleasant and seemingly common sense statements, right? Especially from our friend, the state, who only has our best interests at heart, right? What could possibly go wrong? Fortunately, once in a while, our dark and suspicious natures, born of many years of legal experience, come riding to the rescue. And we did, putting my social work training and experience on the line here, I asked questions. We asked questions of the state. And let me share with you the response, because long story short, the written materials are less than clear. Yeah, I'm trying to look at the memo I did. And got that. Okay.
No, I had it.
Okay. So first we asked, again, going right to the state, going right to deputies, attorneys general that have been involved with this, we asked the following question. Is a private mental health provider licensed by the state of New Jersey required Our initial question was whether the state of New Jersey, whether a New Jersey licensed therapist, social worker or otherwise, is required to register under the new regulations if their sole modality of practice is providing therapy via telehealth from a home office in New Jersey, as opposed to telehealth being conducted from a non-home office. So if your sole modality, as many therapists in this COVID era are doing, if you're practicing exclusively from your home office, are you required to register as opposed to conducting telehealth from your non-home office, right? The response basically was that if the therapist attends to clients both physically and virtually, there is no need to register. Conversely, if you only provide services via teletherapy, must you register? So in short, despite the clear wording of the actual website of the state, they're taking the position, at least as far as the feedback we've received, that if you're only providing teletherapy remotely from a home office, do you need to register? If it's a mix,
Yes.
if it's a mix of in-home and face-to-face therapy, you don't have to register.
But if it's only telehealth,
If it's only telehealth from a home office, you do. We weren't satisfied with that explanation, right? So we asked further questions. Here's the next question we asked. We asked whether this new registration requirement was applicable to private practice mental health providers who were providing therapy exclusively via telehealth due to the emergent COVID pandemic we're all living through, right? We work with mental health professionals every single day, and we have a pretty good understanding of what people are doing. And many people have gone from a hybrid in their offices of in-person and telehealth. Many have switched for the moment exclusively to telehealth, either via home office or otherwise. We asked about them specifically. So if you are providing exclusively telehealth due to the pandemic, do you have to register? That's the follow-up question we asked. The answer was that if practitioners are using telehealth exclusively temporarily, keyword temporarily, because of COVID, you may not be required to register, okay? And I find this a little troubling. When you get down into the details, and the details are the reality many of the people listening in are dealing with every single day, right? The answer is, well, a very definitive maybe. All right. So let me go over that again. If you are practicing exclusively via telehealth due to COVID, you may or you may not have to register. Given that the registration deadline is October 15th, I'm a little bit disturbed by this. We press further, here's their response. Our very lawyer-like follow-up was essentially, what do you mean? What do you mean maybe? And here was the response. Some of the you may or may not be required to register if that's the situation. Again, you're doing telehealth exclusively because of COVID. And the answer is you may or may not have to register. We pressed them. The response was, well, some of the factors we look at are, did the practitioner have a physical location where you saw clients prior to the pandemic? Did you have a physical office, right, prior to the pandemic? Whether the practitioner still has a physical location in which they can see clients when the pandemic recedes, and whether the practitioner intends to see at least some clients in person when the pandemic ends. So those are among the circumstances they're going to look at. Do you still have a physical office? Are perhaps you seeing people occasionally in person at your office? Do you have an office where you intend to return? If those factors are met, it appears that the state would be inclined to say you don't have to register. So what do we know from this? Well, there's clarity and there's uncertainty in these responses, right? It appears clear from these responses that if a New Jersey licensed social worker, psychotherapist generally, has a non-home office, right? You have an office you go to outside your home, and you provide therapy both in person and via teletherapy, you wouldn't be required to register. Okay, because of that mix of teletherapy and in-person. If you are exclusively providing teletherapy from a home office and you don't have or practice at all from a non-home office, and you don't plan to see clients in person, you would need to register, right? If so, you're basically saying, no, my exclusive modality going forward is teletherapy. You have to register. For those therapists that shut their outside offices during COVID, and you've practiced exclusively via teletherapy from their home office, the answer is less clear. Okay, and unfortunately, I know many of you fit into that category. And our advice is essentially that a practitioner falling into that category needs to carefully consider the facts the state will look at, as I have outlined, in determining whether you must register. Let me give you some practical advice, okay? Again, not specific legal advice, but here is what I might suggest to a reasonable practitioner trying to get further guidance regarding their specific situation. Reach out to the state, okay? You'd be well advised to contact the state regarding your specific practice circumstances. You know, and that would have an ancillary benefit, frankly. If the state begins to hear from individual practitioners in this self-described gray area, hopefully they will be more responsive and recognize the need for clarification. Hopefully then Jen Thompson's follow-up inquiry to the state will be, oh yeah, Ms. Thompson, we're so thrilled you called. We have these points of clarification. We want you to get out to your membership. But the safest thing, if you fall into that gray area I've described, is reach out to the state. Obviously, it's going to require some patience, and run your individual circumstances by them. Not only would that hopefully give you the clarity that you deserve, but it also educate our bureaucracy as to the need for clarification for those fitting in that gray area I described.
Thank you, David. There are about 258 of us on today's call. So that is a lot of questions that I'm seeing in the chat box, and I see little Zoom hands raised. So we're going to try to jump into a couple of questions now, and then we'll hand it over to Laura for independent contractor and get back to double questions. One of the questions that we did have come in, David, though, is regarding the need to register if I am a practitioner who is doing teletherapy from an outside office. So we spoke a lot about doing teletherapy from a home office, but perhaps what if I am a practitioner, I have an outside office, I don't see clients there, but I am practicing teletherapy from that outside office. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I would say that.
Oh, and I think we can all agree that David is frozen. The joys of Zoom. Give us just a minute, as you all, I'm sure, have struggled with the inevitable Zoom freeze frame. And it never gets us at a good time. David, you froze.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay. I think the focus of the state, based upon what I've read so far, is not 100% are you doing it from a outside your home office versus in-home office. I think the state's focus is, are you practicing therapy exclusively via teletherapy, or is it a mixture? And I think if it's a mixture, you're okay.
I think that if you have an office pre-COVID, you've maintained that office post-COVID, it might be one of the facts that they look at if you plan on bringing people back in.
Yeah,
don't you agree?
I
That
agree
could be a
with that.
factor.
Yep.
Great. Thank you. Another one that has come in a couple of times regarding walk and talk talk therapy. Does walk and talk therapy meet the requirements of a physical location used for treatment under this registry requirement?
We don't know, but my thought and my argument would be it is. I don't think the focus is necessarily where you engage in the therapy, it's the nature of the therapy. And here, clearly, walk and talk therapy is in person, right? So again, a mixture of in-person and teletherapy. I don't think you need to register based upon the feedback we've received.
Great, thank you for that clarification. A couple of other questions that actually came in before the webinar started, but I see them in the chat box as well, is about practitioners who might have an office outside of New Jersey, but are exclusively practicing telehealth within the state of New Jersey. They do have a physical office, it's not in the state of New Jersey, so their primary modality in the state is actually teletherapy. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, there's nothing in the regulation. Obviously, it's a New Jersey regulation, okay? And New Jersey can only speak for New Jersey. That having been said, I've seen nothing in the regulation which would specifically discount a non-New Jersey office, okay? So you could make an argument either way. What we do know is that the regulation does not specifically address that issue. What I have seen is a lot of emphasis is on, do you have a physical office?
And do you see
Yeah. Clients from there? That has not been modified by, and is the physical office in New Jersey. So a gray area, but again, that's a kind of example of a very fact-specific question that the state should answer for you. Reach out to the state. Frankly, they have been more responsive to questions than I expected. So
I would suspect they would say you have to register in that instance.
yeah,
Because how are you seeing clients
they may well.
physically if you have an out-of-state office?
True,
I mean, I think that would be the answer.
true.
Well, it's good news to hear that they are responsive, as that is not always the case with state entities.
Well, the bar has been set pretty low these days, Jim.
That is true. I'm going to ask one more question from this, then we're going to hand it over to Laura to speak about independent contractor, and then I'm going to open it back up for all of questions. And I see a couple hands raised, and I'm going to, I'll call on you to ask your questions. Tiffany asks, hey Tiffany, good to see you again. What about newly opened virtual practices? The announcement mentions if you've been seeing clients as of August, what if you have no clients yet and intend to see clients in the future via telehealth?
Sure. Just give me a moment, please. Yeah, I think the here it is. The regulation provides that if you're providing services in New Jersey as of August 16, 2021, right, which is around the date when these regulations were announced, you're required to submit a registration application by October 15th, which is 60 days from August 16th, or cease doing providing telehealth or telemedicine services. Let me underscore, and this question gives me an excuse to do this, why this is important, why you need to try your best to get it right, why you need to reach out for that guidance from the state on your specific circumstances. If you fail to register by October 15th, assuming that was your obligation, you're subject to enforcement actions provided for in the regulations, which include monetary penalties, and possibly suspension, revocation, or refusal to issue or renew. If you're in one of these gray areas, do I think it's going to lead to a suspension? No, but especially given the newness and frankly the vagueness of some of these provisions. But I think it serves as a reminder why, unless you're in a very clear situation along the lines we discussed, you really need to reach out to the state for clarity.
That's a good point. And thank you, Faith, for dropping that email in the chat box. Just as a note, we are going to download the chat and try to get to all of the questions and create one comprehensive FAQ. If we can post this webinar today, so we'll have some documents out to you for guidance and some for future references. I'm going to hand it over to you, Laura, now to talk a little bit about the independent contractor, because I know there are a lot of questions about that and what does that mean for our practices?
So we get this question all the time as people are expanding their practice and they're looking to bring on new therapists. They want to know if they can set up as an independent contractor, hire people as 1099s, or do they have to hire them as an employee and issue a W-2? And I think that part of the reason everyone asks this question is traditionally mental health professionals have organized utilizing independent contractors years ago. Unfortunately, you really can't do that anymore today. It's very difficult to properly classify one of your therapists as an independent contractor. So in the state of New Jersey, the default is that everyone is an employee. The burden's on the employer to determine whether or not you have to prove they're an independent contractor. State of New Jersey looks at 3 factors. It's called the ABC test. A deals with control. And generally, I would say that's not going to be a problem for mental health professionals because you're mental health professionals. You don't control how someone is providing therapy. They have a lot of professional judgment. The second prong, B, says that the services that this person is providing has to be outside the scope of your ordinary course of business or totally outside any of your locations where you do business. That's much more difficult to prove because you're providing mental health services and you're hiring someone to provide mental health services. So it's very difficult to say that that's not what you do. It is what you do. With the advent of telehealth, I really think that the state of New Jersey would say if that's your modality, then that's where you're doing business. So I don't think just by shifting away from offices that they would consider your place of business to be anything other than where you're providing services. So I think it's very difficult to establish that second prong. The third prong says that the person has to have an independently established business. So what does that mean? Typically, well, what I see a lot is that people have a full-time job and they want to take on some extra work. So they'll pick up a few hours with a practice. And you know, the argument is, well, no, they're an independently established business. They're doing work here, they're doing work there. Employment by an agency or another W-2 doesn't count for an independently established business. What the Department of Labor would look at is they'd look at the 1099s issued to that person, and they'd want to see that no more than 20% of their income is coming from any single practice. So number one, that's very difficult for you to be able to police because you don't get your workers' tax returns. And number two, it's probably not going to happen. Most people don't have an independently established business there where they're working for 10 or 15 practices. So when people call me, the answer almost always is you need to set up as employees. You just can't do independent contractors. Now, the state of New Jersey is well aware of what they're leaving on the table. And there have been an increase in enforcement actions lately. And what I'm seeing is that they're targeting mental health professionals, occupational therapists, speech therapists, all of these industries that have traditionally been utilizing the 1099 model. They're targeting because they know that no one can meet this test. Yes.
Yes, Ms. Barry, I have a question.
Oh, no.
Why is the state doing this?
I think they need the money.
Money?
Money. You know, when you set someone up as an independent contractor, you're not paying into the unemployment fund, you're not paying into the state disability fund, you're not paying your employer share of taxes. And the state of New Jersey knows that, particularly with respect to unemployment right now. Coming out of the pandemic, that fund is broke. They need that income in. Governor Murphy recently passed or signed 4 bills that deal with this, 2 of which I think are probably relevant to us. The first one says that if the Department of Health comes in and finds out that you have misclassified your employees, they can issue a stop work order, which means you can't practice at all. Now, from a practical perspective, I don't really think that that would happen unless you're uncooperative or you appear to have done it deliberately, but they do have that in their arsenal. More importantly, though, effective January 2022, I forget the date, January 1, it now can be considered a violation of the Insurance Fraud Act for you to misclassify your employees if they can prove you did it purposely. Yes, David.
I have a question, Ms. Barron.
Yes.
What do you mean? What if my employer, the folks I work for and I have a written agreement and it says in bright bold letters across the top, independent contractor agreement. And what about this document that says 10 different times, 5 different ways, we agree I'm an independent contractor, not an employee?
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
What?
It doesn't matter. Also, if they do utilize these 2 new bills, the penalties are really high. So if you're issued a stop work order and you continue to practice, it's $5,000 a day for every day that you do it. If you are found to have purposely or knowingly misclassified them, they're going to consider that insurance fraud. And those fines start at $5,000 and then go up from there. $5,000 for the first, $10,000 for the second, $15,000 for every subsequent. They've raised the stakes now. Insurance fraud, why would that be insurance fraud? Certainly from a workers' compensation perspective, you're not paying your comp premiums, right? And that's important. Not paying into the unemployment insurance, you're not paying into disability insurance, and they want those funds. So I don't recommend setting up as a 1099.
It's very difficult to meet the test.
Yeah, and the audits have increased, and the audits are very stressful for you. And you're trying to manage your practice, and then you have to deal with this Department of Labor auditor, and you end up paying the money anyway. So,
yeah.
Is it impossible for for someone to meet the criteria to be an independent contractor, even under the ABC test that you just described?
Might be possible, but I haven't come across it yet. I suppose it might be possible. The Department of Labor has even taken the position that psychiatrists who are providing medical management to your clients are deemed your employee. And we know that they can't be your employee under their licensure laws.
Right.
But the Department of Labor doesn't really care. Could it be challenged? I suspect it probably could be, but no one's going to spend the money to do it because you'll spend $50,000 to prove a point on a $15,000 bill. Yeah.
It's about the Benjamins.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that came in privately, but I'm sure that it applies to a number of people on this call today. If you are a practitioner and you are in a 1099 situation and you're now realizing, oh no, that's not what I should be doing. Any suggestions on how you approach this and bring this to your what should be your employer, so that you're advocating to fall within the regulations, but also accessing the benefits that you're entitled to as an employee?
Okay, so we're the worker and we're a 1099, or we're an employer and we have 1099s?
We are a worker and we're realizing, oh shoot, we're 1099 and we shouldn't be.
Okay, so that's a double-edged sword. A lot of practitioners like being 1099s because they get the benefit of all of those deductions, right? And if you become an employee, you lose those deductions on your business side. If you, how do you broach it to your employer? I guess you would have to speak with them. It's tricky to transition people over from a 1099 to a W-2. It's an accounting issue. Most accountants recommend at the end of the year, don't do it mid-year. So you can't issue a 1099 and a W-2 to the same person without inviting the Department of Labor in. Other accountants will say at least at the end of a quarter. So they would have to involve their accountant in it. But I guess if you feel that you're misclassified, you should speak to your employer. And as an aside, the way a lot of these audits are triggered are with disgruntled workers who are terminating their employment relationship with their employer, realize that they can't collect unemployment, they can't, whatever the benefit is, and they put in the claim anyway, and that will trigger an audit. They'll take a look at that.
So
Thank
memo
you.
to employers, if you have an employee who is frankly misclassified as an independent contractor, right? Even with all, the product of innocence, not calculation, by allowing that to go on, you have handed them leverage over you in the event that they are unhappy at any point in the future and want to leave you. You've given them an issue that puts you at risk.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
That probably
Now-
wasn't your question though, was it?
Well, no, I think that's a good starting place, right? I mean, it's important. I think there are a lot of people who are on this call who are thinking, oh no, I'm really misclassified and I'm not sure what to do about it. And perhaps want to be appropriately classified. And
Yeah,
just need
if
to
you
know how
want to
go
be
about that.
appropriately classified, I can completely understand that because there's benefits. You're paying into the disability fund, you're paying into the workers' compensation. The unemployment. You're being provided workers' compensation insurance. So, I mean, it does give the employee protection. The employer's paying half of your Medicare and Social Security. It costs an employer about 15% more to have an employee versus a 1099. And that benefits directly to the worker.
Now, how does this apply if someone is a sole practitioner under their own LLC without any employees?
It doesn't.
Okay.
A sole
Fantastic.
practitioner, an owner of an LLC can never be an employee of that LLC. They're an owner and they get distributed profits. They can't be an independent contractor or an employee.
Great, thank you. I'm going to open it up to a couple of the hands because I see the virtual hands raised, growing. So I'm going to answer folks in order. So I believe we have Renata. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and you're welcome to ask your question. If you'd like to tell us where you're calling in from, that'd be great too.
Well, I think that it was already answered because it was what would be the consequences if you don't register and you are in that sort of middle ground that is not so clear that you have to register. That was my question.
You answered that to me.
Yeah, I think we addressed that already, and I think I heard some acknowledgement of that. So,
yep. Brett, I am going to call on you and ask you to unmute yourself. Welcome, Brett.
Yes, thank you. Really appreciate the conversation here, especially both of them, but 1099 W-2 question I've had for a long time. But it relates to my other question for David about the registration. If you own a group practice and you have a brick and mortar office, it's one office, and but mostly everybody in the company works telehealth, but they could potentially use the office if they wanted to, and it worked out schedule-wise with all the other clinicians. Would that business have to register as telehealth? Even so, say I'm the only one using the office, and there's 15 other people in the company, but they could use the office potentially if we work out a schedule. So would that business need to register?
yeah, I think the saving grace there is that there is use in your example of the physical office.
Yes.
And that there is, and I'm injecting maybe some facts, but there is an office. There is at least some people or persons seeing people from there. So I think that falls into the we don't have to register. The focus of the regulations is not on the individuals as much as the practice. okay? And it extends to whether or not you're a corporation, a sole proprietorship, a partnership, or a limited liability company.
Mhm.
Really, your corporate form doesn't matter. It's focused upon, are you seeing people exclusively telephone, remotely, or are you mixing it up?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Candace, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. My question is related to Brett's, although I think I need a little bit more clarification. So initially I was going to ask, if you have a group practice, is the criteria based on the group practice or the individual? So if you have a group practice and part of that practice, you have remote therapists only, are those remote therapists responsible for registering because, and they're part-time employees, and so they may have another, gig that they're doing something else? Are they individually responsible for registering, or as a group practice owner, because you have exclusively remote therapists, you as a group practice owner are responsible for registering?
I think the state wants individual registration. If you are within the scope of its regulations, meaning you're exclusively doing teletherapy from home. Part of the intent of the statute and the regulations is separate and apart from charging you money to register. They want to keep track of your activity as it relates to telehealth. So there is annual data requirements that go with this in terms of the number of people that you've seen via telehealth, the ethnicity of those people, how you got paid. It's a data gathering exercise as well.
So are you saying it's not the employer obligation, it's the employer and the employees?
I'll tell you, it is unclear. It is
Okay,
unclear under
thank
the
you, 'cause
regulation. So
I would
that was
definitely
my
send-
point. Yeah, that
Right.
was my point. Like, who's,
Exactly.
as a group practice owner, is it the individual the individual therapist, who's responsible for registering? Or if you work for a group practice, that burden shifts to the group practice owner?
Especially if they're W-2 employees, because you have the employee-employer relationship. I think that would be an excellent question to email the state, because they seem to be very responsive in getting back, because that's a good question. Is it an employer obligation or an employee obligation? I suspect independent contractors is another one of those slippery slopes where it's not a good place to be as an employer if you have misclassified your people as 1099s and you're really responsible for them.
Okay, that answers it. Thank you.
Do you agree?
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
frankly, the regulations are a little bit unclear. As I said initially, the regulations apply to all telemedicine or telehealth organizations providing services in New Jersey. And that's organizations, whether you're a sole proprietor, whether you're an LLC, whether you're a corporation, but it does not specifically address the issue of what about an individual employee?
Yeah, I would ask the state. I really would.
I might guess, but I don't want to guess on your back. I don't want to guess and have you getting your license suspended or an employee's license suspended. It's worth a phone call to the state.
Or an email.
Or
They're
better
very responsive
yet,
to
an email. And just a note, my friend, the erstwhile Jeff Feldman of NASW New Jersey, has been doing yeoman work, providing contact information and web links and so on, email addresses for the specific state agencies. So kudos to Jeff, and I just want to point that out to people participating.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll follow up in an email to everyone with additional resources, website information, and contact information. I know you are all looking for it, and there's a lot of questions, and you're going to want to reach out to ask your specific nuanced questions of the state, which is really a very good idea, because as we know, there is a lot of uncertainty and lack of clarity in our rules and regulations.
This is not the typical presentation that we do, at least as far as my piece. Laura's got, much more certainty because it's frankly settled, and, we've dealt with it 1,000 times. The Telehealth Registry is brand spanking new. It's vague in many critical parts.
And inconsistent with itself.
And inconsistent internally. So frankly, we're sharing with you what we know, what we don't know, and advocating steps you can take to get a more appropriate answer to your individual circumstances.
Yep. And we can all appreciate that. That is sort of what we're being dealt, and we're all going to navigate it together to the best of our ability. And as a chapter and as an organization, we'll continue to advocate for more clarity and more transparency, and certainly advocate on your behalf. I'm going to ask Denise to unmute yourself. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. So I have a nonprofit, and I work with you beautiful social workers. And thank you for everything that you guys do. I'm not a social worker myself, but for my nonprofit, we were wondering, because we work with telehealth for counseling, but we also go into the facilities or have them come to us in New Jersey, would we have to register? Like I said, we're a nonprofit organization, so we're not actually, I'm not actually doing the services, but we have, licensed social workers that oversee peer counselors and interns.
I think we might be frozen again. I think if you want to nod in agreement that you too also see him. Okay, just wanted to make sure it wasn't on my end. That's a great question, and I'm sure he'll be right back on. At least it
Are
wasn't
you back?
unfortunate.
Okay. It froze
back.
there for a second and we missed a lot of that.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. So I have a nonprofit organization, and we have social workers that work with us, and we also have peer counselors. So we are doing a hybrid, right? We do in-person and telephonic. Would the nonprofit have to register, or would our social workers that are 1099, because we are a nonprofit, we pay them for each session that they do, would they have to register?
I think the question is whether your organization fits within the definition of a telemedicine or telehealth organization. Okay, and that is a very detailed conversation I think you're going to have with the state. Potentially, yes. The more your organization engages in what can be characterized as telehealth, probably more than telemedicine, the more likely it's going to be within this regulation. And don't forget, the definition of telehealth includes a lot of, educational and psychoeducational work.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
That's a firm maybe.
But they're going in, they're also doing physical contact.
So you may be within the potential scope of the regulation, but not have to register because of the nature of your work. But that's a conversation you should have.
So definitely contact the state then.
Yes,
because we do a lot. Our model is based off of the ACT model. So we do a lot of behavior health,
Sure.
Social economic reinforcement with reoffenders.
Yeah.
Thank you, Denise. I'm going to ask Susan, welcome. I see your hand raised. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you so much. So, gosh, my head is swimming with questions. First, I guess I'm wondering, as the profession, the organization, NASW, like this just seems like it happened and all of a sudden we're all now becoming aware of it versus there doesn't seem to have been any time to advocate to, for instance, the state saying $1,500 for most social workers is just cost prohibitive. So that's one. Number two is I'm a solo practitioner. And okay, so I think I'm starting to understand the difference between independent contractors and like a solo practitioner, but I get paid from insurance companies and they provide 1099s, which from what I'm gathering, 1099 by virtue, that means independent contractor. And that's with the insurance company. So, but the thing is, they're looking for the taxes. I mean, I pay all the taxes, including the Medicare, not Medicare. Yeah, I guess Medicare, all the, insurances. When I do my tax returns, it gets folded into what I have to pay because I'm paying that 15% instead of 7.5%, which a regular employee would pay. So the point is, if it's for the money aspect, it seems when people do their taxes, they're paying that money anyway. So I'm very confused what this is really all about. I'm confused about the fact that I get some money directly from clients and then 1099s from the insurance company, but I'm a solo practitioner. It just seems so murky, all of this, and so incredibly expensive. And it seems like nobody's advocating for us. And I'm wondering about that too. So yeah, I just asked a whole bunch of questions.
I can maybe address because I think that was independent employee distinction, right? Is that what you're saying? If you're a solo practitioner, independent contractor versus employee doesn't apply to you at all. It's only when you retain the services of others that would become an issue. So you're right, as a solo practitioner, you get 1099s from insurance companies, you get money in from clients, you file your tax returns, you pay your Social Security, your Medicare, your withholding, you do that on a quarterly basis and reconcile it at the end of the year. So it's not an issue for a solo. I can't speak to the other issues.
Right, but is this registering as telehealth?
Are you talking about the registry?
Yes, I'm now talking about that because that's $1,500,
Yes,
right?
Yes.
And that's because they just want to know who's providing telehealth, separate from what your status is, right? It seems like there's different issues here.
There are.
Yeah, they're two distinct issues. Now, part of the motivation for it may be the state's quest for money. But regardless, all these other things we've gone through stand that we have to comply with if they're applicable to us.
Or, it's possible that they are concerned about the well-being of their citizens and want to make sure that they're not taken advantage of by, telehealth organizations that are being formed solely for that purpose, who swoop in to provide those services.
That's a fair point. I'm a horrible person. I painted the state in its most darkest motivation, but think back on your own experience. I mean, the digital revolution has created challenges and opportunities. One of the things we've all seen are out-of-state text-based therapy companies where they're practicing out-of-state, whether or not they're licensed here, whether they're registered here. And frankly, that's great if you're talking about garden variety anxiety and nobody gets hurt.
Yeah.
But what if a client starts decompensating? What if they have suicidality? What if, you all know much better than me, the horrible scenarios under which you really need somebody that's accountable, that's in state, that knows where the emergency rooms are, that knows the circumstances under which there is a duty to warn and how to fulfill those responsibilities. And this is in part an effort by the state to bring accountability so that it isn't the lowest common denominator governing how therapy works. So there is some beneficial and some laudable purpose behind these attempts to regulate, and it starts with registration. So,
right, but the difference is, and I agree with exactly what you just said, all these companies forming, but we're being penalized financially. See, that's the whole big piece here is this is financially hurting most of us in Jersey who do our own private thing, or even small like nonprofits or whatever, but nobody,
It's
we're
a lot
not
of money.
these, it is a lot of money.
It's
And
a lot of money.
how do we?
It is.
say something or try to advocate for that?
Susan, that's a great question. And I'm going to speak to that a little bit because I think that falls directly into the purview of NASW. And then I'm also going to ask one last question because we're running short on time. An hour runs by so quickly and I see a lot of hands up and a ton in the comments. I apologize, we're not going to get to them all, but we're going to do the best to get one more question in. NASW is going to continue to advocate, for the best interest of our social workers in the state. We do so through showing up at board meetings. We do lots of advocacy alerts that come out. We ask you to get involved, to text your legislators, to tell them what's happening. Reaching out to the state is a really good starting place. But I would say, please be on the lookout for more advocacy-oriented actions that you can participate in. Because while we speak on behalf of the association, what we do know is that often it takes hundreds of thousands of emails and text message and action to affect change. And if we want to change that $1,500, if we think there is an opportunity to be more thoughtful about how that's applied to social workers practicing within the state, it's going to take all of our voices. But I can assure you we're certainly thinking about the advocacy in ways of which we can make sure that the voices of our profession are uplifted. Stacia, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself. You're going to be our last question of the day.
Sure. Thank you. I just had a quick question about timing. You had mentioned the August 16th date, and I'm wondering if I started my practice only telehealth, but now I do have an office where I'm seeing clients, but that started only in September. So I'm wondering if there's a beginning date that the state has in mind. For instance, if there were several of us who wanted to get places before that October 15th date in order to avoid registering, what are the timing frame around that?
So I mean, if I heard your question correctly, I think that we look to August 16th. Okay, if your organization was providing services in New Jersey as of August 16th,
2021,
you're required to submit a registration application if it applies to you. But what I'm hearing from the balance of your question is that it's a hybrid model. And as such, I wouldn't think you have to
even
register.
if it just became a hybrid model. I guess that's my question. Up until
I think you're okay.
Yeah, me too.
I think you're okay.
So I'm saying that out loud for many people who are maybe concerned that if they could sublet a place and start that before the 15th, that's my question.
Well, Stacey, I didn't want to go there, but I will. Let's forget all the people that are listening. It seems to me, and that this is recorded. Can we turn off the recording? Okay. Look, one of the things, without repeating my initial remarks about the so-called gray area, some of the things that would help bolster a case that you intended to return to in-person therapy would be you maintained a physical office. Now, maybe that's a sublet from a friend, maybe that is seeing an occasional client at a subleased space.
Or an office share space.
Or an office share space. Right. Maybe it is a memo in your file or to your employee that we intend to return increasingly to in-person practice as of this date. We are continuing to explore space or subletting space. The more of those kind of factors you can satisfy, the more likely it is that gray area is going to be construed in your favor, such that the registry is not applicable to you.
And it sounded like maybe you are already seeing clients in person.
I just started. I was only telehealth since COVID began. I never did in person. I opened my practice, and now
I understand that. If I were you, what I would do, and I'm not a social worker, I'm just a lawyer, but I would send that email to the state and say, on such and such a date, I started practice. I've recently started to see clients in person. Does this apply to me? Because I actually expect the answer to be no.
Right,
But I would get that from them so that you have that documented.
Right.
okay,
Yeah,
And
well,
I don't know if it matters if it's this week that you started seeing them.
that was my other,
Yeah,
okay.
but
Are they
I would ask them because that way you've got covered.
covered, and are they asking for a percentage of clients? Because I am also
I
licensed.
don't think so. I don't think that it's a percentage, is it, David?
is what?
They're not looking for a percentage of clients.
No. No.
So you
When
could
they
do
answer-
one of 20 in person, and that would satisfy their requirement.
Yeah, there's, we
Yeah,
haven't
at least
seen,
some, I think is the way
Yeah.
they phrased it,
Well,
at least some.
but look, I think the clear intent and in parts, the clear wording of this registration regulation is that if you have a physical location
To provide services.
to provide services,
Yeah.
and if you mix it up between in-person
And
and telehealth, you're not within the intended scope of this registry, okay? That's pretty clear.
I'd still get that
What's
from them.
not clear is some of the, when we drill down into the specifics and many of the different scenarios the audience here has asked, it's less than 1,000% clear. And that's simply why we're saying, you know what? $1,500 each year is
A lot of
worth,
money. Yeah.
is a lot of money to Susie's point earlier, but it's worth checking. I like to sleep soundly at night. It's
And
worth
they
a
might
phone
look
call.
at intent as well. They might look at your intent to see clients in the future. So I would give them the specific facts and see what they say. And that way you have a record of what you've been told.
And they
Yeah.
get to know, the state gets to know that you're out there, you know?
Are
So
you,
Susan's point about advocacy and so on, and you know, I'm referencing my own
I agree with that.
background as president of NASW New Jersey. The more it's one thing to say we've got this great advocacy organization, but this advocacy organization, frankly, is nothing without you. So the more you let your voices be heard, the more the regulators are going to be aware of, you know what?
Especially if they get the same question
Yeah.
over and over and over and over.
There's a
again.
lot of social workers
Yeah.
in New Jersey, and boy, they have some very good
Yeah.
questions that we need to
We
bring
should
clarity
clarify
to.
it. Yeah.
And that's the intent of this.
Right.
So thank you for that.
can you clarify the email we should be sending this to? I saw something from Jeffrey Feldman. Is that the correct one? That
Jeff
I can't
Feldman
follow on
had
that,
it up.
but
It's
yeah.
like TT something.
okay,
And as
DOH.
as Jennifer said, there's going to be a link sheet or an information sheet that's going to go out unless I'm putting words in her mouth.
thank you so much for
And
your
they may never answer another email from us. you know.
Yeah, I think so. We're going to be banned. TT requests, that's T as in Tom, T
Yeah,
as in
that's-
Tom requests at doh.nj.gov. TT requests at doh.nj.gov. And thank you to Ned for reposting that.
Yeah, thank you all so much. We are over our time today,
Okay.
which again flies by. I apologize to those of you who had your hand raised and we weren't able to get your questions. If you want to shoot our staff an email, we'll drop our email in the chat box, and you can shoot one of the staff members at NASW an email with your question. We'll do our best to answer it and direct you to the right resources. David and Laura, thank you as always for your willingness to come and share with us all of the information that you have and help set our profession up for success.
It's my
Your
pleasure.
time and experience is very valuable to us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Pleasure.
For all of our participants, we will share additional resources and information with you in a follow-up email. This video is being recorded, and we will also post that and share information on how you can share it with friends, colleagues, anyone that you think might benefit from today's conversation. Again, we're just super appreciative of you coming together and sharing your time, and be on the look out for more advocacy actions and engagement opportunities, because we are certainly strongest when we stand together and let the state know when there are issues that are impacting our profession. We look forward to doing that and causing some good trouble with you all. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.